I looked up from where I had fallen. It was a large man shrouded in shadows. Actually, it was more of a shadow than a man. The shadows moved across his face in ways that were unnatural, like water, ebbing and flowing. It turned its head from left to right, scanning the dark forest. I held my breath. The shadow man let out a roar that shook the forest to its core, and then everything was silent. It was the kind of quiet that chills you to the bone. Slowly, I rose from the damp forest floor. It hadn't found me. I let out a sigh of relief, and then I felt the cold, clammy breath on the back of my neck. I spun around, anxious at what lay behind me. It was then that the Shadow Man roared again. I woke up screaming. Another nightmare. A cold sweat poured out of every pore in my body. I looked around the room. It was a dumpy little hotel room. The walls were a faded floral wallpaper. It was peeling and cracking in the corners. The windows were clouded with dust and filth. In front of me was a dresser. It was an antique. The wood was a warm hue of browns and reds, and the hardware on it was a tarnished brass, pitted and scratched from the years of use. But it's what was on top of the dresser that had brought me to this town. On the dresser lay a picture of my dear Sarah. She is such a beautiful thing. Her long brown hair that is as soft as silk, eyes as blue as the summer sky, and lips like the softest velvet. My only reason for coming here is to rescue her. A mysterious group is holding her hostage, using her to get what they want from me. I'll play their little games. For now. We'll leave the hotel and enter the streets of Heaven's Gorge. It's a quiet little town nestled in the mountains. Heaven's Gorge is a town where everyone knows everyone. When you look down the street, you can see the diner with its neon signs and 1950s motif. The general store, an old wooden building from when the town was a lumber town, decorated with an assortment of carved bears standing outside. And finally, St. James Cathedral, the tallest building in town, with its large, stained glass windows of angels and saints reflecting the afternoon sun. I press on, knowing what lies ahead of me. The message the kidnapper sent me said to meet in the abandoned lumberyard. By the time I reached the lumberyard, it was nightfall. The only light came from the flashlight in my hands. I gripped it tightly, the grooved metal digging into my hands. A spot the kidnappers had picked was the lumberyard office. The office was starting to decay. The ceiling, which was made of sturdy oak, had caved in from a storm, leaving a facade of rough stone and broken windows. Now was a waiting game. After an hour, a large jeep drove up. It was an older jeep, the red paint peeling and flaking. Also, it was missing one of its mirrors. As they approached, the headlights got brighter and brighter, making it harder to see what was happening. The driver cut the motor, returning the forest to its darkened state. I looked on, anxious at the thought of seeing my Sarah again. 3 men got out of the jeep. The last one dragged out a bound and gagged woman. The first man yelled at me, asking if I had come alone. I replied with a nervous nod. The men then approached me. As they walked towards me, the wind started to howl. With each step the men took, it was like the wind had picked up intensity. In the forest behind us, the sounds of trees snapping and cracking grew louder and louder. When they reached me, everything felt quiet. The air had a tense feeling to it, like something big was about to happen. The first man shouted to me again. "Did you bring the money?" he said. I nodded and threw the briefcase at his feet. He looked up and said, "You're a quiet one, ain't ya?" with a laugh. As he went to pick up the case, a loud roar ripped through the forest. The men all grabbed their guns. Another roar crashed through the forest, and then everything went dark. Before I fell unconscious, the only sounds I heard were the sounds of gunfire and the screams of the men as they died. I awoke several hours later. I was in a lodge. It's very dark, the only light coming from the old red lantern hanging above me. The metal was dented and scratched, showing its heavy use. The glass was a deep, blood-red color and was chipped and cracked. I wondered how I had gotten to the lodge. I sat up in the bed. It was then that I saw a tall, brown-haired woman working on cutting some bandages. I whispered Sarah. She turned and smiled. It was her who had rescued me. Our reunion was short-lived. The roar from earlier shook the lodge. Sarah gasped in fright. I jumped up from the bed and told her to run. I was going to save her from this beast. Outside, the wind had picked up again. It was close. I grabbed the flashlight on the table and ran outside. The winds were intense. The sound of trees snapping and then crashing into the ground were the only sounds you could hear. I clicked on the flashlight and yelled at the wind. Everything went quiet. Then the darkness came. Darkness. Such complete darkness. It was the kind of darkness that swallows everything it touches. I screamed again, calling it names, goading it to attack. The darkness swirled, twisting itself into shapes and forming an object. I didn't stick around to watch what it was becoming. I ran into the cool darkness of the forest, my footsteps thundering loudly as they fell upon the ground. The ground was uneven and damp. I had just managed to climb over a large boulder when I lost my footing, falling to the forest floor below. I looked up from where I had fallen. The darkness appeared again in the shape of a man, but it was not a man. Its shadowy face shifted and moved unnaturally. It let out a roar, shaking the forest to its core. I held my breath, hoping it wouldn't find me. It let out another roar, frustrated. It smashed a couple of trees and then disappeared. It had not found me. I was safe. Sighing deeply, I was relieved that it had not found me. I pushed myself up off the forest floor, began to make my way out of the forest. After a few steps, I could feel a cold, clammy breath on the back of my neck. Terrified, I turned to face what was behind me. I looked into the face of the Shadow Man, and it smiled, with teeth whiter than they had the right to be. I let out a scream, which was drowned out as the Shadow Man let out a large roar. Wake up! Wake up, Sarah said as she shook me violently. I bolted up from the bed. It was in my house. No forest, no darkness, nothing. You were just dreaming again, Sarah said. She smiled at me, her teeth whiter than anything was possible to be. The sunshine that was pouring in through the window was now an inky blackness. Everything grew colder and darker. I looked back at Sarah. She was gone, replaced by shadows. The color drained from my face, the breath escaping my lungs. I shifted my eyes back onto the mass of shadows, and then everything went black. I'm never leaving here, am I?